Anyway, I'm really pleased to be here. I'm really looking forward to hearing what my other panel members have to say and looking forward to the discussion. So in this initial sort of bit from me, I'm probably going to stretch the meaning of intersectionality a little bit far, because I want to raise questions about where the intersection is located when understanding at the intersection of Western and Indigenous knowledges. Now, my own standing at the intersection actually stems from a visiting scholarship that I spent in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In part, I was there to try and find out about Kapapa Māori principles and practices of research. And intellectually and personally, it was quite a challenging experience because many of the institutionalized academic approaches to research practice that I took for granted, they were being called into question. So I sort of got upside down, not just globally, but mentally as well. So I have one example that sort of strikes for me anyway, that Māori scholars are accountable to their research subjects and communities, and they are accountable relationally through time and through space. And so if a Māori scholar acts in a way that harms the community, then it's not just their reputation that will suffer. Their wider connections will be involved, that's past, present, and into the future. Now, in contrast, in mainstream academic practice, accountability is to professional and institutional codes. If I act badly, then my university and professional association will see that as a breach of regulations, and my damaged reputation is borne by me alone. Now, as well as being upside down and uncomfortable, I felt very excited by the possibility of a different sort of research partnership that was being offered very generously to me by a number of Indigenous researchers who I got to know in New Zealand, and especially Helen, who's going to be following on from me. Okay, so I've hopefully moved on to the next slide. Specifically, Helen and I and other colleagues have built on a foundation of establishing personal trust between us to work on a project that was funded under UKRI initiative that was concerned with UK researchers establishing international networks and research projects. Now, where the intersection of Western and Indigenous knowledges that we were standing at was located in our project wasn't a simpler battle point of worldviews. So rather than what can we tell non-Indigenous research about Indigenous methodologies and research practices, the partnership project started from the issue of what do Indigenous scholars need non-Indigenous researchers who want to collaborate with them, what do they need them to know and be aware of? And Tula Branley and I, the non-Indigenous partners, were being guided by and also responding to Helen and Deb McGregor's experiences as Indigenous researchers, their experiences of good, and it has to be said, not good at all, attempts at collaboration. The intersection between Western and Indigenous knowledges occurred where it's important to create and to decolonize a space to value Indigenous knowledges, to attempt to transform ways of understanding the world, and to relate to Indigenous peoples and scholars so that they aren't positioned as deficit. So we're attempting a partnership that works from a non-Indigenous point of view, that works with Indigenous researchers rather than trying to appropriate from them. And it's a partnership for our project to support non-Indigenous researchers to think about their methods and their assumptions and behaviour so that they can do that. In case you're interested, the online resources we've produced include an audio discussion on good and bad practice in collaborations, blogs where researchers share their experiences and tips and so on. Useful, we hope, web links and reading, and a comic that explores what effective collaboration could look like. And it's colourfully illustrated by Olivia Hicks, which you can see on the slide. So, turning to the intersection between Indigenous knowledges and intersectionality theory, Helen and I wrote a blog for CRFR on the relationship. It took the form of a conversation. We raised some overlaps and tensions, and I'm going to just now raise two of them here for discussion. So, taking account of the importance of knowing who you are and where you're located in Kaupapa Māori and also in other Indigenous approaches, I would argue that the relationship between the two depends on where you're standing. So if you're an intersectionality researcher, then you may view Indigenous approaches as one of the elements of resistory and transformative intersectional endeavour. But if the ground that you stand on is Indigenous, then maybe that could feel like Indigenous knowledge becomes a handmaiden for intersectionality. So in the blog, Helen noted that Kaupapa Māori is one space where she and other Māori can defend their right to centre their experiences and their practices within scholarly traditions and knowledge system. So a first question that I'm raising is, can intersectionality serve as a space for Indigenous researchers to form alliances and as a space for welcoming of Indigenous approaches in mainstream universalising Western thought? Can that happen? And as I already mentioned, an issue that I find both fundamental and challenging about Indigenous approaches, and Kaupapa Māori specifically, is the issue of accountability. It seems to me that this might be a point of tension with intersectionality. Now, while intersectionality researchers can be, and they are, self-reflexive about their location, and they can and do feel strongly accountable to marginalised peoples through research and through activism, as in my sort of final question there, is there a generational, communal, environmental accountability in the same way? Now, I have asked myself the question of why I was and why I am so interested in Indigenous methodologies, and why others are too, because books on the topic have a wide readership beyond Indigenous researchers, and there's an interest and there's a push for decolonisation of the academy too. Now, one answer to my question, I think, is that the neoliberal proposal that human well-being is advanced through individualism, competition and efficiency, that has extended into the academic world. So research becomes conceptualized as a market-driven activity, and social research is regarded as serving the interests of systematic accountability and political governance. So all research methodologies are grounded in the specificities of people's worldviews. So where research takes place within Western dominant modes, then it's part of an epistemology that assumes a set of rules about what counts as legitimate research and knowledge that apply universally. So that imperial sort of cultural paradigm and power processes from which those claims about abstracted universality, where they are rooted there, they spring from that, that's rendered invisible. So in contrast to that, in Indigenous methodologies, as I understand it, it's rooted in the intellectual traditions and the evolving sets of knowledges of Indigenous societies and peoples. And that's in a contextualized, non-extractive way of finding out about the world. So those methodologies are in the service of transformative research with the aim of understanding the constellation of oppressions, the injustices stemming from colonialism, and identify struggles and resistances to them, and address the social and environmental processes and relations and transformation. So maybe the attraction for me and other people is that Indigenous ways of knowing seem to be a pathway of resistance neo-liberalised research and knowledge making. And while research as who are non-Indigenous people can't practice Indigenous methods, we might be in alliance through decolonisation and through partnerships with Indigenous researchers that can at least serve as these alternatives for the framing of research. But I'm just going to come quickly to a final question, the one that's posed by the CRFR panel organisers, whether or not COVID-19 has changed the agenda. But I certainly changed my personal agenda because I'm hoped to be in New Zealand at the moment, but I'm not. On neoliberalism and the academy, I think that COVID has made the marketisation of the academy and the instrumentalisation of knowledge generation even starker than it was. And there's political pushback against taking any sort of intellectual stance that reveals inequalities and oppressions, like the push against critical race theory and decolonisation. And that is a push also about valuing Indigenous ways of knowledge. So I think the agenda remains, and it has become even more urgent. Thank you.